Who do you look like? Your father? Your mother? Your grandparents? Maybe your long-lost uncle? What is your identity? And what happens when you lose it? What happens when you find yourself with someone else's face? Or maybe different versions of somebody else's? What happens when the girl looking back at you in the mirror isn't you? Can you ever really go back? Or do you have to make peace with the girl who calls herself you now? What is your identity? Is it what you were born with? Who you were forced to be? Who you become? Or who you eventually make peace with? This is my story of reclaiming identity, holding on to my spirit, and laughing through it all. March 16, 2002, my life changed. I was headed towards my 19th birthday and also headed towards the beginning of the end. I had my whole life ahead of me. Little did I know that I would spend the next 16 years trying to get that moment back. That moment when I had all my dreams ahead of playing sports, making friends, traveling, and being the best possible me imaginable. And then it all shattered. I was heading to Bangalore with my mother and a colleague. My driver was swashbuckling his way through the trip. It was, however, 2002, and I was wearing a seatbelt, no airbags. He did, however, indeed, run an intersection straight into an oncoming truck. And then it all shattered. The next thing I remember was only seeing black. I could hear my father's voice telling me my name, my age, what had happened, but I would forget it the very next day. I could feel my identity slip away. I was blind, and I could also no longer smell. But what I hadn't realized at that point was that I'd lost my face completely. And that was when the lights went out forever. And that moment sent me careening down a path that I could never have imagined for myself. It was a year before I could walk again, and even longer before I could see my face in the mirror. It was a month before I came back from the hospital. A lot of people said that there was no coming back from that, but I barely listened to what other people said. I was busy holding on to the possibly naive but committed dream that I would get my moment back. That moment. But all I could feel were the shards of glass all around me. And then the call came from a medical institution in the US, and off we went in our minds, weaving an impeccable dream and an unwavering future, a plan that would take me safely over to the other side. A lot of people asked me if I thought of giving up. Not a chance. I was raised to work hard, stay focused, and reach for the stars. I didn't like labels like disability. In fact, I thought life is about thinking differently rather than drowning in the darkness of that word. It felt like a judgment, actually. It felt like a judgment. And I refused to be rendered helpless by a force that was not me. I remember the first time I saw my face in the mirror. I was just starting to go to the bathroom, which is a big achievement at that time. I remember looking up and not just being horrified, dumbstruck, or even sad. The girl in the mirror was too broken, devastated, and ugly to take anywhere. Who the hell was this person? I didn't like her. I possibly even hated her. This wasn't what I was promised. It just looked like a very, very long road back to some semblance of human form. But what if I couldn't come back? What if I couldn't? I remember reflecting on my identity when I had my mouth wired shut. The doctors had no choice to realign my jaw, but to plunge me into silence. A silence I wasn't prepared for. A silence that made everything else around me sound 1,000,000 times louder than they actually were. And what happens when you lose your voice? The last bastion standing between you and nothingness? But there were no choices then, as there are no choices now, even today, for me and you. I remember thinking the only thing that would keep me present at that time was my spirit and my fortitude, that I hoped others would at least feel, even if they could not hear me. I remember a particular incident with a very impatient ICU nurse in the hospital. She was clearly inconvenienced by having to wait to change my drip. I remember seeing that it would take a few more minutes for the bottle to empty out, and releasing the remnants of the bottle too early would have blown my vein. I remember looking up at her and praying that she wouldn't do it. And she knew that I couldn't speak or protest. I don't want to comment on why she decided that waiting an extra 60 seconds wasn't worth it, but I guess she did it because she could. And I had no choice but to watch my hand go black as my vein burst, and an unimaginable pain rocked me to my very core. I remember at that point, I guess my threshold for pain had gone up, and I was wiser to the ways of the world. But I remember thinking about identity again at this time, that it didn't have a face, it didn't even have a voice, but all it needed to be was a spirit burning through the night, every night, until the daylight came. I remember leaving the hospitals with more spoils than anyone else. I think I had more than 100 teddy bears, and my father and I shared a joke about it. I think I could have opened a toy store with the amount that I had. I was definitely the last man standing at this stage. I had outlived all my dear peers in the ICU tomb. I was patchy, shaken, but still very much alive. I felt my identity grow stronger as I accepted the cards I was dealt, and shared a joke with my family who had supported me the entire time. As I wobbled my way out of the hospital, I realized I would have a much longer journey coming back than I'd realized. This wasn't what I was promised again, and I had trouble dealing with it. But then there was the aspect of university. I had been accepted at the University of Chicago, which was a dream school. But did I have the chops to actually attend in that state? The biggest obstacle at this stage was my face. At this point, it still made children cross the street with fear. I remember thinking to myself, was I going to let my dream wait till I looked ready? I decided against it. And in came the sunglass chapter. I remember this stage of my life being scary, fun, and extremely devil-may-care. I bought 6 pairs of sunglasses, all in different colors, some very loud. And besides the odd rumor of me being a princess from some far-off country or needing an exorcist, I managed university and jumped right in. I pledged a sorority, I learned from Nobel laureates, and I lived my dream. I may have seemed a tad strange to the onlooker, me with wobbling around in sunglasses in the middle of the night, but I was at this point the rock star of my own concert. But the question remained, would I ever get my original identity back? I was someone who thought an early curfew was a life and death matter. Reading was still a struggle, but I learned to speed read, use audiobooks, and most importantly, ask for help. I wasn't someone who liked the idea of asking for help initially, but I decided it was a good idea since I wanted to compete in the real world. And also I realized that asking for help didn't take away from my identity. I remember having a conversation with myself in the mirror in the dead of the night, every night. Who was this girl? Not the pretty girl, not the unpretty girl. Which pretty girl? Which girl? I was confused. Had I come this far without an identity? But I guess I had one all along. It just took on different looks, attitudes, challenges, risks, and hair colors, with generous doses of acceptance along the way. There were no dearth of dreams in my life. I wanted to go to Mexico, learn the salsa, dance like a Latina, learn Spanish. So I decided to sign on for some classes, pick a one-way ticket, go live with an only Spanish-speaking host family in Guadalajara, south of Mexico. I had taken on an identity of fearing nothing, embracing everything, and throwing a whole lot of caution to the wind. Besides worrying my parents every now and then, I was, in fact, living my dream. No wheelchair, no walking stick, and certainly not the life that others had imagined for me not so long ago. Identity is a big deal when it comes to your dreams. Most of us don't understand that. We frame our identities the way other people perceive it, and not the ones we frame for ourselves. Our limited understanding of our own identity often stops us from achieving and living the dreams we aspire for. I may not have fully figured out who I was, but I certainly knew who I wasn't. I was put in a uniquely stressful life situation, which brought me into a uniquely difficult physical state. I felt I was brought down to nothing, but I came back for everything. And then it came to the subject of a career. It was important. But I realized I was seeking validation at that point, perhaps for all the things I couldn't do or all the time that I had lost. So I chased my dreams with a vengeance. I was a columnist, I was a radio jockey, I was a TV anchor, I was a public relations professional, I was an e-commerce and digital head. I knew I said that all in one breath, but it took a lot more work than that. Identity has been a constant quest, but I've never really arrived at any particular destination. I've just dreamt bigger, stronger, and even more recklessly. Life wasn't meant for me to be careful, sticking to the railings except for the stairs, in 5-inch heels, no less. I don't own many flats at all. Dressing up a girl that I wasn't comfortable with wasn't much fun and didn't get much easier in the beginning, but I started to get used to it. We're now friends on most days. Identity, I believe, is a mosaic of the quest. And many times you find yourself riding shotgun and not really recognizing who the driver really is. Wait, is that you? Which one is you? I may never really pick a sports car to drive myself, but I certainly don't mind shopping in the stretch limo department with a chauffeur that's easy on the eyes when the time comes. Identity is not what I was born with or where I ended up. It was a kaleidoscope of who I was, how I perceived the world, not just when the going got tough, but also when the going got easy. I've always believed that pain is a circumstance and suffering is a choice. I faced immense challenges, followed by incredible wins, even bigger pitfalls, and more amazing mountains to climb. But there's always been a step to take, somewhere to go, and someone to be, which has represented my identity in all of its glory, or lack thereof. I wanted to be many things. I'm barely through my 30s, and my bucket list is done. I think it's time for a new one. Thank you.